There's sometimes a general misconception out there that bucks will bed in the same bed all year long. And what I find is they really move around from season to season. Now does, if you have food, if you have good cover, then they'll stick around the entire year. And that could be a bad thing if you're building that huge doe and fawn nesting ground basically at a doe factory during the summertime, and then they stick around and overpopulate and take over your land and your habitats. But with bucks, boy, they're really changing. And when you think about it, I'll just give you a couple of extremes, is during the summertime, bucks need high overstory, they need shade, and they need summer food sources. They cannot live in the high stem count, hardwood regeneration, conifers, shrubs, areas, upland mix where they might live during the fall because they simply can't rip their velvet apart. There's a pain associated with that. And so they're not going to jam that velvet, those velvet and the antlers that are growing during the summertime through that thick cover that they prefer in the fall. And when you consider fall food sources versus summer and that different type of habitat, then they're definitely going to be in different bedding areas and seasonal bedding areas. And if you look at does and fawns, does need that high stem count cover all year long. They don't have to worry about antlers. Fawning cover, some of the best fawning cover has the highest stem count, whether it's grasses, briars, shrubs, switchgrass, whatever hardwood regeneration. Those does need that to protect their fawns and hide their fawns in. And so a lot of times when you have great food, summer, fall, and you have great thick cover that you prefer for bucks in the fall, then those does are going to stick around 365. So it's really the buck that moves a significant amount. So I wanted to go in from summer to fall to winter to spring, where I notice a lot of these bucks bedding. And I'm going to use this hillside behind me. I'm actually going to take out my phone and I'll point to some of these areas and really try to illustrate just with pointing up to some of these areas where those bucks and does might be bedded, but especially bucks during their seasonal. If you look right up here, that's the front side of this bowl, this really thick area. You know, we shot 5 bucks up here last year. Once you get down into right here and go over, you can see the woods in the distance. That's about 600, 700 yards away. Then the ag fields are out right here. So when we're looking at summer bedding, those bucks are bedded in this first layer of bedding right here. They're not that far off the ag fields. And the reason for that, they're not that far off the ag fields because they don't want to travel a quarter mile every day to the ag fields like they might do during the fall to get to those areas. Also, we have a lot of fence rows down here. We have a lot of grass and briars and garbage around those food plots or around those ag fields. And so those does and fawns find a lot of cover right up next to the ag fields, right where they prefer during the summer months. They don't have to go that far. They're right on top of their alfalfa or soybeans around here, so they really don't travel that far. It's no different than, say, giant bucks that are bedding in Virginia, for example, up in the mountains. And they might be there during hunting season simply because it's away from those big food sources, it's away from the doe family groups, and it's away from hunting pressure. So they go way up high and bed back. Now, if there's road access to those tops, you find those bucks bedding down the bottom. And if there's high quality food at the top, does, then those bucks are bedded at the bottom. That's why I say never really look at if bucks are bedded high or low, always relate it to food sources. Now, when those bucks get into the fall, those bedding areas that were summer right in here, because of the lack of cover out in the ag fields that are back here behind the ridge, because those bucks get used to driving and they want to be back in some of this thick cover, we find that bucks are bedding right up in here. They're bedding 200 yards away or 300 yards away from when they might bed in the summertime. We also find during the fall, the bucks are starting to get up into some of these areas that are above the does, above the fawns. They're back in these areas way up in the ridges. They might be up in that top right up here. We have some really good mature buck rubs back up in here. And then over this bowl where these deer might be coming down to these food plots that we have right out here every single afternoon. They don't mind making that travel, but they're bedding that first layer of right here. The does are taking over, and those bucks take over this layer all the way up at the top up here. And so that's how we find that bedding. We find those bucks getting into fall areas that are traditional fall. They're back in the timber. Those bucks don't need to be there during the summer. So if you're scouting buck beds during the summer and you find active beds, 99% of the time those bucks are not going to be there unless they're islands of cover in big ag land or big swamp land where it really narrows it down to where they can't bed anywhere else just because of the limitations of cover and limitation of high ground or non-ag area. You see the northern Ohio, there might be a 10-acre woods that's surrounded on all sides by ag for a mile in every direction. Well, those bucks might bed there a high percentage of the time because it's all they have left. But when deer have choices, you have mixed ag land and certainly hardwoods, big woods, mountainous, flat, doesn't really matter. You're going to find those bucks really back in the, away from hunting pressure, away from those does and fawns. Now then you get in the wintertime. What's interesting around here, I'll point out some of the winter bedding around here. You know, we're looking at right up here. I talk about summer bedding, fall bedding up in the woods. Winter bedding, we can look right back here, and Dylan might have to duck here. Hey, Dylan. But Dylan, doesn't matter if you're in there. He just doesn't want to be. So, but anyways, back in here, we have big ag lands back here. What you find is this area becomes, it's south-facing, and a lot of that snow melts before any of the other snow. And back in here, there's ag lands right down in here, all the way along here. Really good cover up there. Very hard, very open. You have a lot of cedar, really open bedding cover. And we find a lot of deer bedding there in the wintertime because that south-facing ag land gets opened up. There's a lot of place for them to bed. And so we find when you get into the spring, a lot of those deer are bedded in those same locations. They're the first areas to open up with green vegetation on the ground. We have these north-facing slopes right here. They might have snow on them a month after those areas across the road open up. And so we find that summertime, they're in those open ag areas. They're adjacent to ag, back behind the does. In the fall, they move back into the recess of the woods. It's like the whole deer herd shifts so that you have does taking over that first layer of cover, and then you have those bucks behind them back in the wooded areas where they wouldn't be during the summer just simply because they don't have to travel that far. When it gets into the winter, they're around those standing crops, the sunny side ag fields facing. And it doesn't mean they'll bed on a south-facing slope necessarily. They might bed around the corner because does are taking up that area. But they're hitting those areas because it's ag field. There's less snow in those areas, and we find they're moving into those. And at the same time, a lot of summer hangouts are really reflective of those spring hangouts. When they go from winter and they hit the spring, they're looking for that open ground, the green ground. That's where a lot of sheds are dropping. And it's really similar. Spring and summer grounds, even winter grounds, we find are really similar, where bucks might have a winter habitat where they're trying to escape for thermal cover. They're moving great distances for that. They'll stand next to open ag fields, crop fields. And then a lot of times those areas are very similar for spring into the summer. And again, it goes back to the fall. The fall is the most single different bedding area and deer bed than the entire rest of the year. You can have a little bit of shift from fall to winter to spring, then spring to summer. But boy, they really move a lot when it gets into the fall. And that's why I recommend watching the tips on this channel, really looking at a part-time deer herd. You're not going to take care of these bucks 365 days a year. In fact, they require very different needs from season to season for bedding. Really check out, try to make your property, check out if you're actually inviting those bucks for the fall, if you have that high stem count, making sure you don't have too many does, because if there are too many does, they'll push the bucks right off the property. You don't want to have a 10-day property for bucks. What I mean by that, a 10-day property is one that only collects bucks during the rut. There's a lot more opportunity. If you only have a 10-day property, there's so much more you can do, so much higher potential than that. And really, if you only have a 10-day property, you don't have the ability to mold, shape, attract, hunt a consistent deer herd for the entire season. And so pay attention to those fall food sources, especially the fall cover. Know the differences if you're searching for bedding areas in the wintertime, springtime, summer. They can be very misleading as to where those bucks are during the fall. And if you have that fall bedding, if you keep it unpressured, you have that fall food source that they can relate to all season long, which would not be in the form of ag, then you can create a great fall hunting season herd that comes to your property every single fall. And like right now, we're in the end of January. There's snow on the ground. It's covering the food plots. Those deer are getting towards their winter bedding right now. We don't care. They made it through the hunting season. We had a great hunt this year. And you can too if you really focus on true fall buck bedding areas this season.